Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to Conversations. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Newt Gingrich. We've had a big picture conversation on the past, the present, the future of the country, the world, but I do need to take advantage of having you here as such a shrewd participant in, student of American politics, Speaker of the House, presidential candidate, to have a more short-term conversation about what is happening in the presidential race. How are we to understand the situation? Is Trump for real? What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to recognize that virtually all of us who analyze this stuff would, in January, if you had said to them, if you'd gone to all the people who show up on TV and analyzing it, or write columns analyzing it, and said, okay, you're going to have, in Florida, Trump in first place, you're going to have Dr. Carson in second place, you're going to have a substantial vote for Carly Fiorina, and if you add in Cruz, who is really an outsider who happens to be in the Senate, those four are going to be 62% of the Florida vote.
Right.
Virtually
Jeb
no
Bush,
analyst.
the former governor of Florida, the
And
prohibitive
Marco
favorite,
Rubio.
the prohibitive favorite in January,
Yeah.
and Rubio, right, are in single digits. I think, is that right?
Yeah. So you'd look at that and you'd say, how can this be?
Right.
And I think that it's important. So all of us have to have some humility
Right.
in trying to explain where we are right now, because we didn't know we were going to be here.
Right.
And I want to start with that. I mean, as a historian, I am absolutely fascinated, and I start from the premise that I really respect the American people, and I respect them when they elected Barack Obama. I respect them when they elected George W. Bush, and so I'm always trying to figure out what are the people telling us, and I think that both on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, you're seeing some fascinating messages that were plausible in January but not predictable. On the Democratic side, it's a little easier because Hillary Clinton has always been a bad candidate. She has managed to continue that tradition. But I would have, if we had talked about this in January, I would have said, I think she's going to have a hard time because of the foundation and the fact that you can't let Bill Clinton be around $2 billion and not have so much stuff happening that is really indefensible. I would never have said to you, these people are dumb enough to set up a private server for national security emails, and then they are dumb enough to erase thousands of emails, and then they are dumb enough to pretend it didn't happen. I mean, you look at the last 6 or 7 months, it is a case study in a candidate doing everything she can to inflict wounds on herself. I mean, it makes no sense. And then you start learning, because what it does is it means that on the Democratic side, the spotlight is going to stay on Hillary all the time. I mean, Sanders may grow, Biden may grow. My personal favorite is Jerry Brown, who apparently won't run, but somebody out there will keep growing. But the spotlight will be on Hillary, and every couple of days there will be a new version of something. And she's about to get into Huma Abedin, her very, very close aide, who 1 year earned more money than the President of the United States while working for the State Department. I mean, it's impossible. You can't do this stuff. And so she is in sort of a fight with gravity. Can the sheer power of the Clinton system sustain her despite the fact that she is drifting steadily downward? And that's its own story.
So let's just a second on that. So with all humility that we should both have, and we do both have, I think, actually, because I also have been struck by how I always try to caution that, especially in this kind of year, no incumbent, open seat election, discontent on both sides, these things are much less predictable than people think. But if you had to bet now, Hillary makes it or not?
I don't think she's the nominee.
Yeah.
I just think that every
Gravity-
week there'll be
gravity
something.
wins.
There's this gravity problem, and the fact that you've got, the National Security Division of the Justice Department, which is totally professional and is not going to take orders from anybody, is now digging into this stuff. And by the standard of Petraeus, or by the standard of the CIA director in the late 90s, she clearly has broken the law.
Right.
I mean, it's not like, they had bad judgment. I mean, they just did things that were plain illegal.
Yeah,
and that's before
her
you
violations
get.
seem much more serious than Petraeus's, incidentally.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's sitting there, and I think it surrounds her. And I think despite her best efforts, she can't get out of it. And now what that does when there's a vacuum who knows? I mean, but that's why part of why Biden is becoming more viable, which would mean you'd have a guy who's been in public office for over 40 years, who just served 8 years with Barack Obama as the candidate of change. I think it's
Why isn't Elizabeth? Do you agree? My sense is Elizabeth Warren, if she were to run, or even now if she were to come in, she is really who the Democratic Party wants to nominate. I mean, if
Yeah,
the Democratic
and
Party
she
had a
has-
individual kind of soul,
Yeah,
she's
I
what
think that's right.
she stands for, and she would have the advantage of not having been part of the Obama administration. As much as you can, in a third-term race for a party, should be a fresh face and a new face, and she combines the first woman reality as nominee and conceivably as president with the kind of left-wing economic
Yeah.
agenda that they would like to have. Why? I don't know. I don't know why she isn't
I-
running.
I mean,
Maybe
I-
she will.
She might. I think I get the sense that she's really happy in the Senate trying to set public policy goals. And I think, if you're a normal, rational human being, even if you're an ambitious, normal, rational being, and you look at the brutality of a presidential race, what the news media is going to do to you, what your opponents are going to do to you, the sheer exhaustion of crisscrossing the country and raising the money, it's a formidable decision to decide to run if you're already a national figure with a good reputation, who's doing things that are fun.
Yeah.
So, but I agree with you. I mean, I think she would be clearly formidable. Although I'm told he won't do it. I think Jerry Brown would be very formidable. I mean, he starts with California, and that's an enormous base, both for fundraising and for just if he would carry California, he'd automatically have a huge delegation. But one of the things which has propped Hillary up is that the decay of the Democratic Party has so weakened their bench. I mean, this is one of the stories that Washington has not covered very well. The Obama years reflect the largest collapse of the Democratic Party in modern times. They've lost state legislators, they've lost county commissioners, they've lost governors, they've lost lieutenant governors, attorneys general, you name it. So when you get below the presidency, you have the strongest Republican Party in history. Excuse me, literally more state legislators than ever before in history. And what that does is it means that the Democrats don't have a bench anymore. They don't. There's no farm team. There's nobody out there who's rising, and that poses a real challenge. And the places where they almost have a bench. I mean, I don't think Governor Cuomo is in a position to run. He's got too many scandals in Albany. So they, you look around, and you start saying, so who's going to fill this?
Right.
And I think that's a. But on the other hand, vacuums don't last long, and somebody will. And,
Yeah.
But if I were betting, I think Hillary's going to have a very, very hard time getting to the nomination, let alone getting to the general election.
And on the Republican side, Donald Trump, the front runner.
Well, it's this is one of those stories that's a reminder of how narrow and how small Washington is. Trump has been a national figure at least since the mid-'80s.
Right.
He has been a New York real estate player since the 70s. Excuse me. He inherited his father's Brooklyn and Queens business, took it to Manhattan, and dramatically grew it. He has had I think, 12-year television show, The Apprentice. He has managed his celebrity status to a reasonably good-sized empire. You can argue whether its real net value is $4 billion or $10 billion, but it's something.
Enough.
And he's a character.
Right.
And that helps him because the challenge for a traditional Republican, for a Mitt Romney or somebody who comes out of that kind of background is they want to be normal. They want to say, I'm just one of the guys. I may be worth a couple $100 million, but I'm really one of the guys. Well, Trump has no interest in being normal.
Right.
Trump wants to say, hi, I'm really rich, and it's really exciting to be really rich, and I'll bet you're having a good time hanging out with the guy who's really rich.
And I'm going to fly my helicopter to the Iowa State Fair
Exactly.
and wear my shirt with cufflinks, and I'm not going to pretend to be,
And one of his underlying thematics is, wouldn't you like to be rich too? I mean, if you want somebody to teach you how to be poor, we have several candidates. I'd like to teach you how to get to be rich. The other part of it is he has, and Randy Evans, who's been my advisor for many years, is the person who really put me onto this. Randy's a great trial lawyer. And he said, part of the reason you have this mismatch of analysis is everybody in Washington thinks policy matters. and they want to talk policy. Trump is offering a very simple model. It's time that we win.
Yeah.
I'd like to win. If you'd like to win, you're with me. I can't tell you yet how we'll win, but I can tell you that my background is we're going to win. And so the average American is looking at, Hugh Hewitt asking a series of names none of them know. And Trump going, hey, if I need to know him, I'll know him. But I think those guys will be gone. I'm not going to waste my time. How would you like to win? And so he has a base that is, I think, bigger than the number he's currently getting. I mean, if you look at the underlying, are you going to vote for him? He's at, I don't know, 28, 30 depending on the number. But if you look at people who say, are you glad he's in the race? Are you who do you think would do best with the economy? He's in the mid 40s, for example. And I think there's almost a lagging indicator. Now, so that's Trump. He's over here. I think more fascinating than Trump is Ben Carson. I mean, if you were to say to me, we're going to find this guy who is a brilliant neurosurgeon, who did world-class breakthrough surgery, separating conjoined Siamese twins, who has had a movie made about him, who I think called Gifted Hands, who has an extraordinary childhood story that is just gripping.
Yeah.
And he's going to...
Best-selling books.
And he's going to be extraordinarily the quietest candidate in modern times. And he's going to come in very quietly and say, hi, I'd like to heal the country the way I healed the two twins. Would you like the country healed? So you got Mr. Winner over here, and you got Mr. Let's Heal Things over here. And he's now running second.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, and this is what I try to get across to my friends here in Washington, if the American people are so mad at Washington that 62% of the votes going, well, I'm throwing in Cruz just because I think in all fairness he's not, nobody up here ever believed he served here.
Right.
If 62% are saying, if you're elected, you're not on my list.
Right.
The country is saying something about their level, at least in the Republican Party. They're saying something about their level of unhappiness. But there were polls out this week that showed both Carson and Trump beating Hillary nationally.
Right.
And so you have to look at that. Now, that's partly because she keeps decaying, and that's going to... But it's also because there's a... This is what happened with Reagan. There's a period where you look like you're radical, but they watch you for a couple months and you don't seem all that radical. And then they begin to think maybe you're not radical, and then one day they think you're okay, And Reagan went through this whole period from 76 to 80 where he got more and more and more acceptable. Well, it may well be that what you're seeing in part is Trump and Carson and to some extent Fiorina becoming acceptable, so that people don't have this double standard of saying, oh yeah, they're interesting, but I could never imagine them because they've never been in office. And instead it's going to be kind of like, they're really interesting. In fact, they're a little bit more interesting than these guys who've been in office.
Yeah. I wonder if I've had it backwards. So we had a poll of Weekly Standard readers. It's a straw poll. They had to choose to email in their choices, so it's not scientific. But 15% below the country's average of Weekly Standard readers seem to be who answered this poll, but it was several thousand, are for Trump as their first choice. So we're not that it's more pro-Rubio, a lot of pro-Fiorina. Come back to her in a minute. More conventional, I suppose you'd say. People who've been interested in politics a long time and probably put a somewhat higher value on having served as a governor or senator. But when I did have the wit, I guess, to ask the question, but whatever your views on who you're for, are you pleased or not that Donald Trump is in the race? Or do you think it is helping the Republican cause and the conservative cause that Donald Trump is in the race? 63-37, yes. So think about that. 15% are for him, but 63% say they're happy he's in the race. Now, my conventional, I think too conventional probably, interpretation has been, so they're happy he's in the race, he's sending a message, and they hope the other candidates get the message, and then they go to one of the normal candidates. But I recently started thinking, couldn't it be the opposite? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe 63%, maybe it's the opposite, that as he's in the race longer, the gap between those 15 and 63 start to say to themselves, well, I'm happy he's in the race, and he seems to be doing fine, and he's not crazy the way people say, so why can't I just be for him? And that would be the dynamic than
Yeah.
Reagan. And that would be the dynamic
Yeah,
that gets
and-
Trump to actually win Iowa with 41%, New Hampshire with 37%, South Carolina with 16%. Suddenly, I don't know, why isn't he the nominee at that point? You know, I mean, I haven't really, I've kept saying it's not going to happen. It would be so unusual, but I don't
Well,
know.
and it partly requires him to be methodical
Right, which-
in being interesting. Okay, I mean, as long as he doesn't wig out and do something crazy, every week he's going to become more acceptable. And I try to suggest to people that I think Trump learns faster than any politician I've known except Bill Clinton. I think this is a guy. The reason he made so much money over the years in so many different places. He's not like Perot. Perot made a lot of money doing one thing brilliantly. Trump has dabbled in the Trump ties, or Miss Universe, or television. Or I mean, think about the range of what he does. This is a guy who gets up every morning and absorbs information all day, but because he's so bombastic, people assume that he doesn't know much. But the fact is, he knows a great deal. I mean, he understands how to read contracts in a way that probably no other candidate does. He understands how to deal with city councils, with state legislatures.
Seems to understand the media pretty well and advertising and stuff.
That's
I
right.
mean, aren't you struck by?
Well, I said one afternoon I was thinking through. He has used more social media than all the other candidates combined. He has bought more advertising than all the other candidates combined. He's bought more health insurance for his employees than all the other candidates. He's run more parallel independent operations, managed them, than any other candidate who's running. I mean, the breadth of what he does is pretty spectacular. Now, he's also an unknown quality, and he could this afternoon go wandering off and do something that ends his candidacy. But so far, at least, he's actually shown a pretty good cleverness partly because he has a core model of staying on offense. I mean, I read the transcripts today. The Sunday after the Fox debate, when it was all the stuff about Megyn Kelly and all that, he was on 3 shows, which in itself is amazing, on Sunday morning. And I read all 3 transcripts because I was curious how he was going to do it. And they would say to him, "Isn't there a women's problem?" And he would say, "You're right." He said, "I don't know how Jeb Bush said that. I thought it was terrible." I mean, he went straight past his own. He never defended himself. He created an alternative reality for the viewer, and was off and running again. And so this permanent offense characteristic is powerful. Now, again, I don't think we should get so enamored in early September that we think this is over. You've got Bush has a very smart team. They have enough money to compete with Trump. Kasich is very intelligent and very methodical. Rubio may be the best debater in the group in terms of presentation, although Cruz technically was a national debate champion. There's and Carly's very, very smart. So there are a lot of smart people gathered around this hunt, and I don't presume today that Trump will be the nominee, but I don't presume today that he won't be the nominee.
And you don't presume that Ben Carson couldn't be the nominee, or Carly
I
Fiorina?
think that any of those 3, Fiorina keeps growing. She is. I served with her on the State Department Transformation Advisory Group. She is a very quick study and very smart, and I think has really used the opportunity she got out of the first debate, which will turn out to be very ironic. I mean, she
Right.
really wanted to be on the 9 o'clock debate, where she would have been one of the non-Trumps. But by being in the other debates, she shined so much that even in the 9 o'clock debate, they talked about how well she had done. And so she jumped like 6 or 7 points, which in a national poll is a lot. I mean, that really made her. And it'll be interesting in the near future at the Reagan Library debate to see how she does now that she's on the main stage, and whether, in fact, it was to her advantage to be on the main stage.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those great irony, unanticipated consequences thing.
Right.
Yeah. She got the biggest bump probably from the entire evening.
Oh, I think she did.
Yeah.
I mean, the 2 people who got huge bumps were Trump because he didn't fail.
Right.
I mean, the absence of failure meant that he had crossed one of the big hurdles, because I think a lot of people tuned in to see him fail.
Right.
And then he didn't, and that left him. And then she rose. I mean, Trump didn't rise from that, but the absence of failure meant he was still the front runner. And in her case, she rose substantially and got to be. She's now a major player.
So three of the leading, I'm going to say 8 or so candidates, because there probably are the bottom tier. I mean, anything could
Yeah.
happen and all that, but probably they were now down,
Right.
don't you think, to 7, 8, 9 who really
Right.
have a credible shot. Three of them have never been elected. One,
Right.
Carly Fiorina, ran once. The other two have never run for office. Trump thought about it, I guess. Carson, apparently not. That's pretty astounding. Is that ever?
Well,
I mean,
well, look, you've got last Sunday, the Guatemalan people voted to put a comedian first in their presidential race. He came in, he only got 24%, but he will be in the runoff as the front runner. In some ways, the emergence of Berlusconi was very similar.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree.
you had a billionaire TV magnate who reshaped Italian politics substantially because they were so sick of the way the system was working. Remember that in much of the world, the parliamentary systems are designed for stasis, so that it's really hard to have a disruptive force because all of the old order can gang up on you. Presidential systems allow for a lot more openness. And we have probably, which is ironic considering the size and power of the country, but we probably have the most open system in the world.
right.
And so, excuse me, you can be a very junior senator and beat the wife of the former president, which is what Obama did. You can be a peanut farmer, nuclear physicist, and beat the entire party establishment, which is what Carter did. You can be a guy who made movies with chimpanzees and beat the party establishment, which is what Reagan. It's easy to forget. I mean, Reagan was not the establishment candidate.
Yeah. I mean, I've been struck that people, the last 30 years have been pretty establishmentarian in terms of the ultimate nominees. There's always been the interesting challenger, the unusual candidate, the Buchanan, the Forbes, the whatever. But at the end of the day, in really every case, except to some degree 2008, the John Kerrys, the Bob Doles, the George H.W. Bush, and then George W. Bushes have won. Romney, of course, the Republican side, it continued, you could say, with
Right.
McCain, the most senior senator, and then Romney, the front guy who'd run before and the front runner. Even Obama's upsetting Clinton, I mean, it was impressive, but he was the number 2 candidate. It wasn't.
Right.
So really, but people forget, I think, you do remember this, there was a stretch from, I would say, 64 to 80. I mean, think about it. Goldwater totally transforms the Republican Party and wins. And you could have made a lot of money betting against Goldwater, I believe, in 1962
Yes.
or 63. You could have made a lot of money in 68 betting that Lyndon Johnson would not be the nominee. And then maybe Bobby Kennedy would have been, I guess, if he hadn't been assassinated. And then that Wallace would go third party. Nixon would come back. I think it was a cover of Time magazine in November 66. Rising stars, the likely nominees in 68. And it was Governor Scranton and Senator Mark Hatfield and various other, I think Governor Romney of Michigan, actually, and not Nixon. People
Right.
forget how much of a surprise that was. 72, McGovern, who was he, really, I
Yep.
mean, 76, Carter. I mean, people, again, he was way below, wasn't he? The other, there were all these established senators and governors who were
Right.
respectable people, Birch Bayh and all these characters. Carter wins 76, you almost get Reagan beating an incumbent president. And then 80, Kennedy almost beats Carter, and you get Reagan, 69-year-old, presumably could never do it. I mean, so you do have that stretch there where there's a huge amount of turmoil, people coming from nowhere. Then we have the stretch of 30 years where there's sort of the opposite, and I do wonder whether we've reverted to the, maybe this happens
I think
cyclically
somehow.
somehow. The 76 is like a better, looking at the 76 race, Reagan almost beats Ford,
Yeah.
and Jimmy Carter wins the Democratic nomination. Maybe a better model for thinking about this year than the Romney race or the 2000 race or the other ones.
I actually think that there probably is no. The two parties are in such different situations right now that there may be no parallel to what we're about to go through because you've got the Democrats are sort of trapped inside themselves. I mean, it's a little bit like watching them sleepwalking into the vote on the Iranian deal, where in the end they decided the threat from liberal interest groups was greater
Right.
than the threat of a real disaster. And so they're going to line up and become, the Iranian party in a way that I think really would have seemed implausible 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And is, again, a tribute to Obama's willpower and the degree to which they have wired their party from the left now. So the two parties are in very different positions. I think if you get either Trump or Carson or Fiorina. The only analogy may be Andrew Jackson in 1828, because I think he so disrupts the system that he doesn't get a good biography until Schlesinger in 1945. I mean, the elites just hate him, and then they never forgive him. And none of these three, I mean, unless one of them decided to become normal, none of these three, if they won, would by definition be normal. They would reach out to a new set of supporters. I mean, they'd have a cabinet that was very different. They would have won with messages that were totally outside the traditional pattern. Their relationship with the Republican Congress would be very tenuous. It would be very different than, whereas on the Democratic side, they're desperately trying to find continuity. And the question in part will be what's the American people's attitude for deliberately creating a discontinuity because they're so fed up with the current system.
And any advice you'd want to give them before next week's debate at the Reagan Library, the candidates? Anything?
My only advice to all of them is to not focus on Trump. Focus on getting your message across to the American people. Realize this is a very long game. Somebody who tries to take Trump head on is up against somebody who's a very good barroom brawler and who can counterpunch very fast. So if you look at a guy like Kasich has a Kasich story to tell. Rubio has a Rubio story to tell. They ought to focus on having a relationship. I always used to say, I was not in the debate. I was communicating with the American people with the debate as a backdrop. That's really what I'd suggest to every single one of them.
No, that's good. And on this scale, final question of, look, at the end of the day, these things revert to normal, and Trump fades, Carson fades, and we end up with an elected official and a reasonably conventional Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, sequence, and you got to look at the states and figure out what's going to happen. Versus, it's a totally disruptive environment, and the normal analysis. This is a case where once every 50 years or whatever, the normal analysis just doesn't work. You seem to be you're on the latter side of that spectrum, or somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the latter side, partly because of the Gallup data on corruption. I think when you have a country where 75% of the country thinks that corruption is widespread in government, you have the current economic situation, you have the current general sense of things not working. I think that's a country that wants real change. But you could have one of the traditional elected officials figure out the rhythm to be the most disruptive traditional person,
right.
And they could suddenly give the outsiders a real contest. I don't think if it comes down to a keep the status quo versus outsider, I think the status quo person is going to get run over. I don't think in that sense this is like 12 or 8 or any time in my lifetime, I don't think.
On that note, that was very interesting, and we'll have to reconvene in 2 or 3 months and see what we
happening.
totally missed that will have happened. Thanks, Newt.
Thanks.